that screen too.
Right. Marcus. Let's see if we can get this going.
Cool.
Okay. I guess we're sorry for the delay there, guys. Technology, you know.
It's so hard. So I guess we're in good shape.
I think we're ready to go. Let me
Cool.
just make sure we can. All right. Oh, you man.
Okay. So we're here today to talk to you guys about tearing down that wall, which, if you don't know, is a reference to Ronald Reagan. Not just because we love the 80s. Specifically talking about how we're going to harness the power of taxonomies to create unique site experiences and, you know, a cohesive structure beyond just what we normally get with Drupal right out of the box. So a little bit of introduction. My name's Marcus. I work for Boast as the designer, but I also have a little bit of dev experience. And this is Drew.
Yeah, I'm Drew. I'm the senior developer at Boast. We've worked with Drupal for many years and have built many Drupal 8 sites, so a little bit of experience in this area, I guess. And we work pretty closely together. Our desks are about 2 feet apart. So.
Yeah, so we can talk dev design like that. So it's kind of a unique situation, I'd say. So there's a little bit of overview of what we're going to talk about today, specifically the problem that we're trying to, I wouldn't say solve, but at least approach from our technique, solutions to how we can sort of tear down the walls between dev, design, and clients, a case study for how we're actually implementing our solutions, our conclusions from working this way, what's next sort of for, you know, how we see this project moving forward, and obviously questions from you guys. So obviously the big issue is the problem itself. So typically when you have a new project, you kind of have these 4 different components. You have the design team, you have the dev team, you have the client, and then you have the stakeholders. And they're more often than not sort of walled off from each other. So unlike Drew and I, who sit literally next to each other, your dev team and your design team might be in completely different places. They might not communicate right off the bat. Your client could be somewhere else, and the stakeholders could be even separate from your client. So we want to find we're looking to sort of find a way to get beyond those walls, because for each individual person, specifically the stakeholders, holds their own interests in mind. So as shown here, if you have 4 stakeholders, each one can have a different color in mind. They can have different goals. They can have different content. And we want to find a way to break down between all 4 of these boxes so that everyone is communicating together. So the real issue is that, you know, trying to build a single website with multiple subsections or divisions, not using multi-site, and including various stakeholders with competing unique for each section. So everyone is trying to be an individual, but they also have to be part of a group. So typical case, one organization, a large organization that has lots of divisions. So these are the walls that we're talking about between the stakeholders. You kind of envision it as like a Rubiks Cube, where you have every single sticker is its own division, and then the cube as a whole is the organization. So we're talking about lots of stakeholders, not just 1 or 2. Some cases in upwards of 20 or even 30. And how do you get to all of these people and talk to them about their desires, their wants, their needs, their expectations, get them all together to understand each individual component so that we can distill it all into one design that'll satisfy the organization as a whole, as well as each of the individual stakeholders. Or to put it another way, there can only be one design. How do we please all these people? So that's the design side. Drew's going to talk a little bit about the tech side.
Yeah, so, you know, as we said, we work pretty closely together, but there's still unique problems for designers and for sort of developers and technical implementation. One of the challenges for sites like this is keeping content sort of sorted into its various subsections, but not siloed. So we want to create systems where content can be shared between various parts of the site, but it sort of has a place where it belongs. It's like logical home. So we call it sorted, but not siloed. The other problem we often have is that Drupal has sort of its specific structure and organizational structure. You know, the organization of your client, or maybe your agency, your business, or what have you, doesn't necessarily align with the default structures that Drupal provides. So that can be a challenge. And then, as Marcus mentioned, you know, you talk to 4 different stakeholders. They're all going to have like their own wish list of functionality and tools that they're going to want to use. So how do you kind of coalesce all those into a common feature set that we often face. So basically, different strokes for different folks. And just to continue on that, the more complex your site becomes, the more stakeholders you have, it often becomes more difficult to create sort of an intuitive content management experience. I think that's one of the perpetual challenges with Drupal is as the sites get more complex, it's easy to sort of have like, I guess like paradigm creep, like, okay, to manage this, you go over here, but then to manage that, you have to go over here. And it can get really challenging for a user, especially when you have to train that user and then they call you and they can't find something. So that's a major problem. And that often happens when you have lots of content editors. So lots of content, lots of people on the site, it just becomes challenging. Another thing that often happens is you want to sort of visibly separate or visually distinguish different parts of the site, which, you know, in Sketch and Photoshop is a piece of cake. You go and you select new background color, and that's great. From a technical point of view, how do you do that? What are the rules that surround that color being there? You know, is it a separate theme? Is it not? You know, there's a lot to consider there, and that's one of the problems that we often face with building these websites for, you know, these large organizations is how do you kind of manage that rule set? And I think from a technical point of view, that's what it really comes down to. So I just want to give a quick example of what I think is sort of a good implementation and that also illustrates the problem. So if you go to olympic.org, there's one site and it's olympic.org and it has basically subsections for every Olympic Games, going all the way back to the 1800s. And each section sort of has its own distinguishing features. So this is just one example. You can see the color palette is different. This is the Rio Olympics and then the London Olympics up there. So it kind of matches the branding for each Olympic Games. If you kind of browse the site more, each sort of Olympics has its own icon set. So like for archery, for example, there's a different icon for the 1980 versus the 2006 versus the 2010 Olympics. Kind of an interesting thing. So you have this sort of cohesive whole with individual branding inside of that cohesive whole. So Marcus is going to start us off talking about some of the solution.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I mean, we say solution, but there's actually typically, I mean, especially with Drupal, there's usually more than one solution. So we say solutions. So we're talking about our approach to solving this problem. So actually, I was just at this talk designing with Drupal Development in mind. So they kind of talk a little bit about how you would design team need to sort of think together in order to really understand, designing a certain type of system so that it can actually be built in Drupal, knowing the limitations and the expectations of what modules you have available, what the developer is typically used to using, that sort of thing. And so if you can always check out that talk a little later. But in particular for the problem that we were facing, we were looking at a single site divisions. So just sort of rehashing what our issues are. And we start off with trying to sort of put in place design constraints. Particularly, we would give the heading, the navigation footer as kind of boundaries to a design so that those are kind of fixed in place, and then everything in between, there's a lot of flexibility. So using things like paragraphs or other types of modules like stacks, you can sort of move things around depending on the development team and be able to make something feel a bit more customized per subdivision. And you, as particularly mentioned here for this example, we can leverage the power of paragraphs, not paragraphs.
Paragraphs.
That's a great name, though.
I know. That's
if we ever make our own paragraph module, it's going to be called paragraphs. Leveraging paragraphs to create something that it'll still feel visually unique because it is the client can actually move things around and make it feel like something that they want because they can pull in the paragraphs that we've created. They can leverage those from a different department as well. We can build them all at once and give them the power to change things as they want. So a solution that's sort of along these lines is the city of Boston. So a few years ago, they did a redesign of boston.gov in Drupal 8. What?
It's Drupal 7.
Oh, Drupal 7?
In Drupal.
Sorry, my bad. This is why you're the tech guy. But so they had all the content reformatted and by one person, like all the content went through one person. So that way everything looks exactly the same, everything fits perfectly. And that kind of gets around the issue of having, I mean, they had all the different stakeholders because they had all the different departments, but they had one person to funnel it all through. And that helped sort of alleviate some of these issues because they said, look, this is how it's going to be. That is obviously the quick and better way to do it because then you don't have to really concern yourself with everyone's different opinions about what they want and their desires. But to alleviate some of those issues, they left the existing site pages for some of the departments, like the police department, intact, and they left it, they have as gateways on the new version of the City of Boston. So looking here, oh, I guess this laser pointer actually works. So on the left, you have the home page, and then if you drill down, you get the departments, and then there's a police landing page where there's a button that says learn more about the police, and that takes you to this version of the police department page, the Boston Police Department. So they have leveraged the new design for boston.gov across all the departments, but they still leave the original department intact so that you can drill down further and get the information, leaving the police department to still manage their content in their own way. Alternatively, different departments that you might not expect a city to have, like archaeology, which still shocks me that Boston has an archaeology department, but they have their pages completely designed in the new version of boston.gov. So it's sort of a give and take depending on the size of the department, what they want control over. So this is all built within the D7 new Boston theme.
All right, so let's talk about some of the watch out, the technical aspects of solving these problems. One thing for us is discovery and vetting are critical. So Drupal is open source. All the modules are open source. Many of them are very good, but they may or may not fit your use case. And so before you sort of say, oh, yeah, we'll use paragraphs for that, that's fine. It's always good to sort of do some discovery and check to make sure it's actually going to fit your unique needs. And vetting them for bugs and other issues is really important ahead of time so you can properly scope out projects. And as with anything, we don't like to talk about this much, but every platform has limitations, and Drupal is no exception. So knowing what those limitations are, knowing how they're going to impact your project, and especially when it comes to sort of these large projects with lots of sort of stakeholders and stuff, you want to have all of the knowledge kind of going into it. Keeping an eye on performance is really important. So again, the more complex the site becomes, it can sort of happen slowly but surely that performance degrades over time as you bring in more external dependencies, more modules. So just kind of keeping that in mind at the outset when you're sort of thinking through your technical implementation. And then lastly, and I think this is something that we've talked about already in this half hour or so, and then other folks have talked about, is really working together with your implementation team, your tech specialists, and your design team working together. Because if before design goes out to the client, it can pass sort of my desk and I can say, oh, well, if we move this like over here, it would be a lot easier to build out in Drupal. It'll save us hours of time. And the client's not really going to care. But the challenge becomes once a client's seen a design, once they've approved the design, that's it. It is locked in. And it's really hard to change at that point. So it's always nice to have that. For me as a developer, it's always nice to have the opportunity to say, oh, well, maybe we could just like switch this around a little bit. And I think that's also something that was talked about in the keynote too, is sort of this collaborative design process. And I'd like to think that while you get all your design team on board, you also have the opportunity to run it by your technical team. Oh, this is not plugged in. No. So what do we think about designers and devs working on design together? Excellent. Anyone seen Bill and Ted? If you haven't, that was probably really
We only just slightly planned that.
Yeah.
No guitar riffs.
Yeah. That would have been great if we had like the little background. Anyway. So we're talking about building a site with many sections. There are a number of tools available. Multisite is a great tool if you really have sort of siloed content. And what I think that's generally best for is you have a common feature set and very discrete content. In this content that's mixed, you have functionality that's mixed. It all sort of needs to live together. Taxonomies are sort of the classic Drupal way of categorizing content and organizing your thoughts around where content should live. But you can also use content types as well, and we've seen this before. And then obviously user permissions, so sort of walling off sections these areas of access. But this talk, we're talking about specifically taxonomies, how we've used them and how we think they're incredibly powerful and can be used to sort of create these organizational sites. So taxonomies are traditionally used for, like, as I said, categorizing content. So you know, the classic use case is tagging blog posts. So you've got sort of these tags, you can add them to blog posts, you can do views, and you can see a list of posts tied with, you know, learning or education. But especially in Drupal 8, they're fully featured fieldable entities, which means they can be related to just about any other entity. And that means that that sort of interconnection lets you do so much more with them than just sort of tagging blog posts and categorizing content. So I like to call this not your grandfather's taxonomies. There's a lot more you can do. So when we approach these large sites with sort of a lot of different stakeholders and subsections, we think we create a vocabulary for each that holds like either departments or divisions or whatever, you know, the client is going to call them. And we like to think of each one of those sections as a taxonomy term, and it can be represented by that taxonomy term. And typically they have fields in common. So, you know, they might have an address field, or they might have their own YouTube channel, or what have you. Those can all be added as fields in the taxonomy term, and that can be used to sort of create these unique sections of the site. It's kind of like a site within a site. And as I said, design variations can be implemented as taxonomy fields, and then you can use that association to sort of sort content into its appropriate place inside of the site. And what this lets you to do is you can handle user permissions. So users can be tagged with taxonomy terms, your content's tagged with taxonomy terms, and boom, you already know which users can access which content. And there's the taxonomy access group module, I believe, that lets you kind of implement that. Taxonomy can provide sort of a context for content. So, you know, one common example is color themes. So each sort of section can have its own color theme, and a piece of content tagged with that particular taxonomy term can be sort of shaded appropriately. So, you know, maybe one part of the site, the color theme is blue, so it has a blue header, and then another site, it's red, so it has a red header. It lets you sort of provide some context for your content. And then lastly, it helps us develop user-proof admin interfaces. So we all know how difficult it can be to kind of instruct users and get them to where you want them to be. And we really think of the content editors as, or I guess, we think of content editors as sort of first-class users. So we actually think about their experience first before we think about the anonymous site visitor. What is the experience like for the content editor? How can we create systems that are easy and sort of delightful for them to use and to make their day-to-day job much easier? Because, you know, as an agency, they are our clients, and their happiness is our happiness. So that's a big part of what we do.
So corny.
Sorry. So we're going to talk a little bit about a case study where we implemented some of these strategies and techniques.
And to be aware, this is still in progress. One of our clients is the city of Portsmouth, which is where we're from. So the city government actually runs like all the sites for all the different departments. There's over about 20, or I think there's like 22 departments. They've added just a few since we started the project, and they're all under the same domain. So cityofportsmouth.com, and then the department name, and they're all living in this one site. It gets about 65,000 views a month, and every single page is unique right now. Every single one of them is an HTML page. Static HTML. So as you can imagine, that's not great. It's not mobile friendly at all. In fact, the best chance that you could probably actually view it on a phone would be a phone like this. that's about just as useful to view the site on your phone, on your iPhone or whatever. But as you see, I mean, just looking at this page right now, you can see that there's a lot going on. This is the home page. So this is a little example of just three different pages. So you have the home page in the middle. This one over here is the police department, and this is the Prescott Park. All three of these are, as I said, they're static HTML pages. They're three different departments, well, the city and then two side departments. And sort of the design structure gets shifted a lot. I mean, there's some weird thing going over here. Text is floating over an image. And if you go to any of the sub pages under each of these departments, things change even more. So stuff jumps around. It's not consistent. And our goal was to get in there and we wanted to create something that worked across the board. So in starting this project, one of the things that we knew was going to be very important was communication with our client and the stakeholders. So we met with every department and we sort of laid out what the process was going to be with the head of the project, which was the IT head from the city of Portsmouth, and as well as the individual stakeholders, these departments in this case. We wanted to make sure that everybody was sort of involved throughout the process. So the designer, which was me, and then with the dev team, and also all the different department heads. And to make sure in all these meetings with the departments to find common ground, to make sure that we understood what each one of them wanted and where they all sort of met. And that was where we're gonna sort of build a base from. And keep in mind the entire time, like the sort of standard tenets of design. So we wanted to keep in mind, responsive. We wanted to make sure that it was easy to use, accessibility, things like that, because as I showed you in our example, the current site does not really exhibit any of these tendencies. So from the beginning, from the design start of this project, we met with the head of the project, the IT guy, and sort of discussed what the idea was, the project timeline. And then from there, it was like, do we want to meet with every department? We knew at this point we didn't know, but Boston had said no. They did not do that, whereas we were actually going to go meet with every single one of them and figure out what it was they wanted for their particular department's page. As you can imagine, with 20 plus departments, that was a lot of time, a lot of different voices. And it wasn't just the head of the departments. It was some of the staff members, the people who would actually be adding in the content, the people who, the police officers, the firefighters, everybody was giving their feedback. At points there was actually user input from people who would be using the site. So it's important for us to realize who is the site for, who is going to be using it more. The city council uses it to keep track of information. The standard citizen uses it to find out where the fireworks are going to be, things like that. So every single meeting with the departments helped us figure out more and more what they saw their users as needing and what they saw themselves as needing from the site. And from after meeting with all the departments, created wires, sort of standard stuff. Showed the wires back to the head of the IT department. He approved something. We went to each department to show each of them their specific homepage, and we were designing it so that the header and the footer were static, but everything in the middle could sort of be moved around. So if they saw something they didn't like, they wanted a YouTube channel, a paragraph or a block, we could put that in there. They wanted Twitter, or they didn't want the Twitter, they wanted photographs, we could move all that stuff around. And we went sort of through this time loop of keep iterating only a couple of times. I mean, it was like 3 times to make sure that they had exactly what they wanted before finally going through creating designs, meeting with the deputy city manager. They got to approve the designs based on how they saw their site being used versus how users. So we still had to make some adjustments there. And then finally, design was approved, and we got to go on the fun part of the dev. So I'm so sorry. I don't want to deliver this joke, but I'm going to anyway. So who's got 2 thumbs and loves good process? This guy.
You thought he was going to do it to himself, but it's
actually not right. So our end result was not my joke for record second. The end result of this was a suite of themes that we've dubbed Metropolis. So it's themes and modules specifically designed for municipalities and governments, municipal governments. Sorry. So it's right out of the box. It's mobile friendly. So you have mobile phones, tablets, desktops. The idea is that for each department or each subsection, you're going to have a color theme, which is customizable so that it feels cohesive. If you go to the police department or the library from the city's homepage, it'll feel like you're still part of the city, but you also have the individuality of each department on its own. And we're going to mind developing this, well, designing it, knowing that we would be thinking about paragraphs so that we could have elements on the page that could be moved up and down based on what each department wanted. So if they realized that, oh, the Twitter feed was actually the most important thing 3 months into the project being done, they could just easily move that up higher, problem solved. They saw a paragraph that they liked on a different department, they could request that, and they don't even have to request it because it already exists. They can just put it in on their own. And there are a lot of elements that are actually dynamic. So if you have content such as press releases or news or a new YouTube video, those automatically can get pushed to the homepage. You can also select whether or not you want it to show up on the homepage. You can remove it. Things were way more dynamic than what they have now, where every single element has to be
manually updated.
Manually updated
in Dreamweaver.
Don't get me started. It's really painful just to think about it. So just a refresher. This is what the site looks like now, and this is what we're moving towards. Sort of once again, it's not done yet, but have a more cohesive feel. So the police department, we have the department name up here. This is Prescott Park, and it's sort of adding imagery. They didn't really have a lot of imagery, and that's something that a lot of people are more used to now with modern web, that there are big photos, there are big heroes. And that was something that they were missing that they actually specifically asked for. So we've implemented that. We have a notification system, which a department could create an alert, and that could be pushed to all pages across the entire city, which is something that they didn't have anywhere near access to before. Meetings, which would be generated through a calendar that could be pulled onto the homepage or whatever page that has this meetings paragraph, and it's dynamic for each department or using the taxonomy. And sort of the big piece that they were looking for here was a calendar, a master calendar that worked. Each department would have their own calendar, but it would all funnel into a master calendar that could be seen on the city's homepage. But at any point in time, if the rec department edits one thing, it'll be affected throughout on the master calendar itself. And the content can be associated between departments. So if you have a rec program that is involved with the schools, if you go to the schools page, all that content can still live there. It can live on the rec department page. So content can be shared between departments, but it's also at the same time, it can be managed separately by each of them.
Cool. Take it away. So as we are approaching this sort of Metropolis solution, when I think about Drupal, I think about rules, because I think to implement any clean system, it has to have rules. And what I tried to do is kind of develop that rule set and keep it as simple as possible. But once those sort of boundaries are defined, we want to make sure that we can allow flexibility inside of those boundaries. So maybe a thing has to be in a certain place, but it can look any variety of ways inside of that location. And what we're really talking about is creating a system of assumptions. So if you can start to make assumptions about the way content will be formatted, or the way it'll be structured, or where it'll live, you can start to really unleash the full power of Drupal by customizations built off of those assumptions and rules. So here are the rules that we came up with for this Metropolis solution. I think it's sort of good rules of thumb for any Drupal site, but again, especially for large, complex sites with many sort of subsections or organizations. So in the city of Portsmouth and Metropolis, every node is assigned at least one department. So every node lives somewhere. And as you know, taxonomies are hierarchical. So some nodes live under the city as a whole. So the city is sort of like the master department. And then there's all these sub-departments. And then even like the schools department has many schools. So there's a high school, there's the middle school. So every piece of content has a home in a department, and that's a required field. Every page is a node. So no pages that are comprised entirely of blocks, no pages that are view pages, no panel pages or anything like that. Every page must be a node because since all nodes have a department, it means every page implicitly has a department assigned to it. So that's kind of what I'm talking about in terms of assumptions. I like to use blocks very sparingly. I think if you're putting in all sorts of like URL filters in the block where you can say this appears on these 3 pages, but not on those 4 pages. Right to me, and I think they're difficult for a client to manage. I like to use blocks pretty sparingly for sort of global elements that appear on just about every page. Instead, using paragraphs, as Marcus mentioned, for sort of complex, visually complex design elements, where you'd rather not have the client kind of messing around in a WYSIWYG editor to create this sort of columned layout or what have you. So here's some of the cool stuff that we implemented because we were able to build off of those assumptions. And so we built the custom admin menu. I guess it's kind of hard to see here. But so you can see right next to the standard content, we added this departments dropdown, all the departments. And we also implemented, because there are so many of them, this little search functionality with some jQuery Ninja stuff. So you can click the search button, and this turns into a text field, and you can start typing, and it sort of pre-filters the list. Because as an admin user, you want to have access to all the departments. This makes it easy. And then when you sort of hover over each department, it shows a list of sort of simple content types that makes it easier for them to get to. So you can see we've got like pages, profiles, frequently asked questions, press releases, videos, and footer menu. So each department actually gets to create their own menu. So when you go to the police department page, the sort of header menu is totally different from the home page. And you know, this is just sort of the tip of the iceberg, but I wanted to demonstrate sort of how creating these sort of little hacks into Drupal, or not even hacks, but sort of little enhancements can really create a better experience for your content editors, who for us are our clients, and we love making our clients happy. So, you know, that sort of thought and thinking that goes into designing not just the page layout, but also sort of the information architecture can also help your improve your admin interface. And then this is, you know, just showing on the left is the basic taxonomy term, and we fielded it with a number of things. So obviously the name, they can add images that are specific to each department. It's kind of blurry, I guess, but you can see because everything in Drupal are entities, and it's easy to sort of cross-reference entities. This is where they just select from a drop-down the header menu and the footer menu that they want. So they can set that up however they want. And then on the right is just creating a basic page, and you can see we have our required department field where you can add multiple departments, and that's what Marcus was talking about with sort of the cross-pollination. And the nice thing is, you know, I just think Drupal is so powerful, and this is all just basic sort of Drupal implementation, but you can build on these basic concepts to create sort of more complex things. So one sort of example that I wanted to walk through really quickly, again, just leveraging sort of basic Drupal infrastructure, is the video gallery paragraph. So we have this concept of, you know, different departments have YouTube videos, and you know, we wanted them to be able to add a paragraph that displays their YouTube videos, so you know, specific to that department. And the challenging thing is, you know, there's just this sort of global list of YouTube videos, and we wanted to make the experience as simple as possible for content editors. And the way we ended up doing it is when you create a taxonomy term, you can input a YouTube username. And every day, we wrote like a little script that goes out to YouTube and pulls in their most recent videos as content. And those are just a basic YouTube content type. We use the contrib module YouTube field, and it's just basically YouTube ID. Provides a lot of great functionality. So we just wrote a little script to automate some of the import processes. And then we created this video gallery paragraph. And we used the view field module to create a field which represents a view, again, using Drupal sort of entity relationship architecture. And one of the cool things about the view field module is, again, it's kind of blurry on the screen, but you can say always use default value, which means that the user actually can't edit this field. It's sort of fixed. And the way that can work is we say we want the videos view, we want the teaser display, and then you can't really read it, but it says arguments. And we created this custom token called paragraph department. And what that does is it reads the department associated with the node that this paragraph lives on. And in that way, when a client adds this paragraph to a page, the only information they have to know is what they want the title to be. And it automatically pulls in the videos associated with the department that page represents, or that page is located in. And so what that looks like is this. So, this is the police department. They have this program called PPD-TV, which is unintentionally hilarious. It's just, they have the police officers in and they interview them. They're pretty funny. But yeah, so this pulls in the latest ones. And, while there are sort of many, many, many other YouTube videos in the system, all the end user has to do is type in PPD-TV, say that 3 times fast. And it just imports the videos relevant to that department. So this is sort of accumulation of, thinking about the content editor experience and trying to make it as simple as possible, while also providing sort of this this pretty robust functionality to handle many organizations or subdivisions within a certain organization. So just sort of in summary, tearing down the walls between design, dev, and clients is huge for us. And it's really important. Trying to get everyone in a room talking together, especially with Drupal, which has sort of an opinionated render pipeline. It's good to have feedback. I personally, as a dev, love the opportunity to sort of comment on design. I know,
yeah, you do.
I have friends who work for other agencies and have experience before, or you talk about these projects where, you're sitting at your desk, someone comes by and goes, "Here are the approved designs. Good luck, build, let me know when it's done." And you're like, this is not really going to work with Drupal at all. Like, Drupal wants it to be this way, and you're designed it this way. And if we could just move this over, it'd be so much easier to build. So, if you're a designer, talk to your devs. Even though they're sitting over their computer and typing furiously at their code, they're probably very friendly and would love the chance to sort of comment on the design and learn something, because, these tend to be sort of bubbles, and I've learned so much from talking with Marcus and hearing about what his concerns are as a designer versus mine as a developer. This is a huge one too, is clients and stakeholders are not monolithic. So, we always talk about the client, but the client could be 20 different people, all who want different things. And have I gone way over?
No.
Okay, sorry.
You're good.
All right, sorry. I just looked at the clock and was like, oh my gosh. So we often find that part of our job as designers and developers is actually brokering sort of compromise between various factions of the client. So that's important to keep in mind, is you're not going to get this sort of one cohesive thought. And in fact, a lot of what we do, especially in the sort of wireframing phase, is finding that common ground and seeing how this stakeholder can agree with this stakeholder on certain items. Again, so when you manage large amounts of stakeholders, developing rules I find to be very helpful. And then you sort of have that line in the sand to say, nope, this is a rule, we agreed on it, set in stone. And then, yeah, Metropolis, we leverage the power of taxonomies. We really just put this on here so we could put the key man graphic up there. Anyway.
I'm telling you, our next theme is going to be called Grayskull.
Grayskull, yeah, exactly. Just go for ladies. So what's next, Marcus?
So, I mean, Drew made fun of me for putting this on here because I have a science background, and usually at the end of a talk, you talk about where the research is going next. But I think it's important to sort of think about in terms of Drupal design and development as a whole, like where things are going based off of what we're working on. And like we have some solutions. We found a path to solving this problem of a client with a lot of stakeholders and how to sort of get them all to talk and find a common ground. But I mean, there's still a lot of issues there to be resolved. I mean, in particular, like we were running into problems with, we had one or two really tough stakeholders that we kind of had to acquiesce to them and make sure that everyone else sort of could follow along in suit. And it worked fine because they all work independently. So they don't really know like the fire department doesn't really know what the police department wants. But we were trying to make sure that they all had the same accessibility at the end of the day. So we were sort of like, okay, you are way stronger, or you are way more vocal. What do you need? We'll see if we can get that to work for everybody. And it did work, but in many cases that might not work out. So that's just an important thing about keeping communication open between the stakeholders, and in some cases even stakeholder to stakeholder, as well as with the client and as we've talked about, the dev and design team. It's one thing that we pride ourselves on at Boast, is that we like to think about design as being iterative and dynamic. It's not static. Like, it's kind of a weird thing that if a designer just hands a developer just like the design, in many ways it feels like, oh, that's it, because it's, oh, this is a file or this is a piece of paper and that's it. It's a PDF. But in many ways, we like to think about how, okay, that's how it looks when it's going to launch, but we know that there's going to be iteration over time. New modules are going to come out. There's going to be changes by the stakeholders, by the users, what they're going to want. So you have to sort of be prepared to be able to make adjustments, make the design feel more fluid. It's a living thing. It's not going to be, this is it, that's it, we're walking away. We want to be able to work with our clients over time and make sure that we can continually provide something that's new and fresh. And while it might, we're trying to also build something that can last a lot longer than just, it looks like something that was a current design fad. It'll kind of outlive, even if we have to step away or they have to step away at some point, it'll still feel like it'll work no matter when. And as we sort of mentioned, continuing to tear down the walls. But more importantly, I mean, the main fact here is a quote, my favorite quote by Abraham Lincoln, which is, be excellent to one another. So, I mean, we are very lucky because we do work right next to each other. I heard a lot of stories today about dev teams that are companies that are just dev teams and they don't really have access to designers. And they might, they are the ones that just get dropped a design in front of them. I think at those points, it's very important to talk to your client and try and open up those channels of communication with the design team, because not every answer is going to be given to you right off the bat. I mean, it happens to me all the time. Like, I'll be working and Drew will turn around and be like, Marcus, what the heck does this mean? And like,
I'll just interrupt him with whatever he's doing. Yeah. I'll see a design on the screen and be like, no.
Like, oh, okay, yeah, no, I get it. I mean, I'm not perfect, obviously. I make tons of mistakes, and I realize, oh, okay, right, I didn't design necessarily that piece based on what you were thinking or what this person was thinking. So it's like important to make sure that you're always talking, because I think at the end of the day, the only way to make sure that is actually something that will work, for longer than 5 minutes when it goes live, is that everyone has had their input. They make sure that, the design is something that feels natural, but the dev team knows that the design has certain limitations, so they build for that, and then vice versa, and that the client understands. And this is something that we've tried to do sort of along the way, to make sure that the client understands what the limitations are, what the rules are, because sometimes they might hear Drupal and they think, oh, Drupal's amazing, so many sites have been made this way, obviously you can do whatever you want. And we were like, well, sure, but there are still rules that have to be in place, and making sure that at the end of the day, you can all shake hands and understand exactly, all right, I get what you're saying, we're going to work together with you to sort of make it work, because we want to all build great stuff. I think at the end of the day, we can all agree on that, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, just in the final comment, piggybacking off that we think of Drupal as a framework for building a content management system, and not necessarily a content management system out of the box. So it's sort of this like foundational layer that you then build your system on top of.
Right.
And I think sort of establishing your rules up front makes saying no later on much easier, which, for anyone who's worked on a big project, that saying no is one of the most important things you can do. It helps keep scope creep and schedule creep out of your project. And so having that sort of system design up front, thinking about your information architecture, and having those rules in place so you can say no with confidence, I think we find to be pretty important.
Yeah, it's the with confidence
yeah.
part that's, I'm still learning that one. No. Yeah. That's when I have to look at him. I'm like, so is this going to work? We've talked about this. This isn't going to work, right? No, it's not going to work. That's not going to work.
The hard thing with Drupal is like everything can
work. It could
work. It's like, how much time and budget do you have?
That's key. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, thank you. And now we're open to any sort of questions that you guys might have. So I think you had to hand up first.
Yeah, I'm more curious about the discovery, because I mean, with the scale of the client, 20 plus people to talk to.
Yeah.
And I'm sure everyone has an opinion on crazy ideas that they want.
That was a fun part of the project.
You have to come up with, well, of course it's possible, but how much work will it take? What modules do I want to add? I don't want to add too many modules because that's overcrowded and whatnot.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit more about that process, and sort of like when you figured out where to draw the line, and sort of when to figure out what is worth custom coding, and sort of that gray area?
Sure. From my side of things, I went into this project knowing that we were going to have to be handling a lot of different departments. So I knew that we were going to want to make something. I mean, from what the client told us, from the head of the IT department said, we wanted to make something that felt cohesive. And so thinking that way, and after talking with Drew, we said that we didn't want to do multi-site, that we wanted to do something that was a singular site across the board. That I knew from my little bit of dev experience that paragraphs was a powerful way to sort of get around some of these things, because we want to give each user the ability to move things around, and that way they're not just stuck with something. So I knew that we wanted to leverage paragraphs. We talked a little bit about a calendar system. That was kind of at the early stage. We knew that those were at the least, those are things that we wanted to get done. But then talking with each department, that was when things kind of got a little crazy, because I would go in and say, okay, this is what you have right now. We've gone through your site. We know a little bit about what the basic content you have. What is it that you want, and what have you looked at? Like, what do you need? What do you want? And what have you looked at to get inspiration? The last part was the hardest one, because when you ask them for what they like, things get out of control really fast. And then when you show them something that doesn't look like what they like, then they get a little worried, as I'm sure many of you are aware of. So we had the police department in particular. They had seen a site which apparently every police department in the nation really likes. It's Milwaukee's police news website. And they had seen that, and they're like, this is great. This is exactly what we want. I'm like, cool, but that's not going to work out, because, we couldn't explicitly say, because the fire department isn't going to use that, and the library isn't going to use that, and the recreation department isn't going to be able to use that sort of thing. We had to use the lingo to get around that. But essentially went to every department, asked them what they wanted, made a long list, sort of crossed off things that we didn't think were going to be useful in the long term, sort of pared it back down to something a package that we knew everybody could make use of. And from there, Drew and I mean, we had a lot of discussions throughout the whole process about sort of what were the limitations. Like I didn't want to say yes to everything, because obviously you can't do that. You want to, but you can't. And we actually ran into a problem with one of ours, which is the library. We wanted to give them a calendar system that was very unique, because they have one. And at the end of the day, we were just like, it's not going to be possible based on what the other departments need. And they understood. But I mean, it's a difficult process where you have to tell one or the other that, sorry, we just can't do that, based on not necessarily on the budget, but on the fact that this lives slightly outside of what all of you need. And I think with a large company, they have to understand that they are part of something larger. And it's a hard thing especially when these departments don't talk to each other. And most cities have a library that works. They have their own website and they work on their own. The police department has its own website, and Portsmouth feels like a very unique situation where they all live under the one domain. And convincing them that this was the best route to make it feel cohesive was a little bit of a challenge for some of them. Others were just like, no, that's fine, whatever, dude, you want. I mean, we don't even look at our site. We don't even know. We have one page. It's like, okay, cool. I'm glad we had this talk. There were departments that have one page, and I was like, this is easy. I don't know why we really have to talk here, but we wanted to make sure that we understood that we also wanted to get more content from them, because there was stuff that wasn't on their site that would be useful. Like, we wanted to have photographs of the people, so that if you came into the city manager's office or the welfare department, that you would know who you're talking to. You could visualize that person. You could find contact information. And some of them didn't have that, and it was our way of sort of building up, like improving what they already had. Because to be fair, all the information was on their site for the most part. It was impossible. It's so hard to find. And that's a very long-winded answer to what you're saying. I don't even know if I got it all. The discovery was probably the most challenging part of the process for me. To all these disparate people trying to just coalesce everything that they wanted into one design was hard. And at the end of the day, we had to decide that the final choice was going to be with the head of IT and the deputy city manager, and that the individual departments were going to get a say on the design. They got a say on their wireframes, because it helped us figure out what paragraphs we were going to need to build. But for the final design, that was all between us and the head of IT and the city manager, and we were like, and we can give them colors, and they can put their seal. That way, it feels more unique to them.
Okay, sorry, I think you were next.
In regards to so that discovery process and then throughout the project, was it just the two of you guys on the team, or were there kind of additional people who suss out the relationships with?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would say that the head of IT, who he mentioned, who is our sort of like primary contact with the city, was pretty critical in that respect. I mean, I think he helped us sort of navigate the waters. You'd be surprised how much sort of personal politics there are in a small town, or maybe you wouldn't be. But he would help us navigate. So he'd say, okay, you're going to police department. Here's what they want to see. And okay, now you're going to the fire department. This is what they want to see. And so he helped us kind of navigate those waters. But at the end of the day, it really came down to us getting their feedback, coalescing it. Again, sort of generating a system of rules based on that feedback, and then saying, here's what you said that fits within these rules, and here's what you said that didn't. And that's kind of the process that we went through.
But yeah, for the first part, it was basically me and the head of IT.
Yeah.
And we went to meet with everybody. So the design was approved. It shifted so that it was more of Drew and the head of IT, but I still worked in because I was helping with content management and you know, also keeping contact open between the departments and Drew as well, so that we never, at no point, it was like we didn't cut ties and run. It was constant communication just to make sure that everyone was able to be heard.
I think we'll take yours, then I think we'll probably let you guys go.
Okay, this should be quick. Do you allow stakeholders to add taxonomy terms on the fly, or did you just present them with a list and say this is what you have to work with?
Great question. So we have varying permission levels, and so only admins can add taxonomy terms. So there's, you know, the head of IT is sort of the admin. They have a lot of sort of like, the city will often undertake these like special projects. So for example, they're building a new wastewater treatment plant, and they wanted to kind of build like a department that was sort of that project, that represented that project. The head of IT was allowed to do that. Other, like your basic content managers are not allowed to add sort of arbitrary sub-departments.
So I guess in some ways there are still some walls, but we try to say that things are separated, but they're still shared. So nothing is completely inaccessible if necessary. Yeah.
Thank you guys. I feel like we went a little bit over, but thank you very much.
3 minutes. Oh my gosh. Oh no, that's on this page.
So stop broadcast.